Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on CAMARA. We are talking about from code to connectivity, taking a deep dive into CAMARA's Fall 25 meta release. So thank you for being here. We've got a great group of panelists and experts from the community. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them, and we'll get started. We have Tanja de Groot. She is with Nokia. I will mention all of our speakers are also on the CAMARA governing board, and they are ingrained within our technical community as well. We've also got Herbert Damker with Deutsche Telekom. He's also our chair of our technical steering committee. And we have Johanna Wood with Vodafone. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window. We will dedicate some time at the end of the webinar for some Q&A. So before we kick things off, here's just a quick agenda. We're going to have an overview and an introduction of what CAMARA is. We're going to talk about the release process. We are going to go deep dive into what's included in the Fall 25 meta release. We're going to give some recognition to some of our top developers, and then we will open it up for Q&A. All right, so I will go ahead and kick things off to Johanna.
Thank you very much, Jill. Hello, everybody. So a quick recap on CAMARA and what CAMARA is before we dive into the detail of the meta release. So CAMARA's mission statement, quite lofty. So ultimately, we want to expose telco network capabilities through APIs so we can really deliver benefit for the customers, and by making the telco network complexity much simpler. And we want to do that across telco networks and countries so we can really make that easy and seamless access. So quite a big mission from CAMARA. Let's dig into how we're going to do that, Jill, with the next slide. So these are the key problems that CAMARA as a project is working to solve. So the first is how we drive these opportunities at scale. So with such a complex and a broad industry, how do we kind of ensure that those APIs that we develop are relevant and kind of span across those networks globally? The next is consistency. So maybe, in terms of how we excite the CSPs to start developing and exposing services, we need to make sure that those services are consistently exposed. So if a developer wants to consume a service and their app spans multiple countries and multiple markets, there's a repeatable way in which that service is going to work to enable that scale. And that builds the next piece in terms of simplicity. So from an industry point of view, I think it's easy for us as telcos to be quite familiar with the complexity that our networks bring, but we need to make sure that we demystify some of that and develop services that are simple and easy to use and intent-based. And the next is accessibility. So it's not just about, CAMARA is an inclusive open source environment backed by Linux Foundation and a collaboration space where not just telcos, but the hyperscalers, developers themselves can come together and work on these services to make sure that we are working to create a use case that's really going to be super useful. And the last is demand driven. So making sure that we collect that insight from the customers directly and the developers directly, but also from industry and from wider conversations. CAMARA is not the only element. So it's a piece of a jigsaw in a wider collaboration space, and it works to complement and alongside some of the other efforts that are happening in order to expose these network capabilities and services. So just as a bit of a reminder as to how it all fits together and to reassure the complementary nature of these services. So TM Forum, for those who are familiar, so TM Forum will look after those elements of how we order a network API service. So from an ordering point of view, that's very much in the TM Forum space. So following those standards in terms of how you would onboard and consume a network API service. working with GSMA on providing some of those technical standards, the templates, the playbooks, as well as the market alignment or development of those services. And then CAMARA is very much bringing that API definition, that use case centric, so really driving that adoption and the utilization and development of these services. Next slide. So just getting into detail, so the CAMARA will collect those API requirements from a variety of inputs, including the GSMA operator group, define the service APIs and the service management APIs, create those test plans, cases, and tools, develop and test the service APIs and service management APIs, and create developer-friendly documentation. And then it will deliver the service APIs and service management API definitions and documentation, service API and service management code, as well as test plans and cases and tools for all the APIs contained in the deployment packages. And for more information, you can have a look at the GitHub repository for the CAMARA project, which is listed here. So that's a little bit of background as to what CAMARA is and the context in which it's striving to achieve the creation of these network services. And I'm going to pass over to Tanja to talk a little bit more around how we've worked together for the full release.
Okay, now it's good. All right, first I'll have a quick overview of how CAMARA works as a project. So in CAMARA we have 5 working groups, which you see listed at the bottom here. The API backlog group, which is where people can submit new APIs to the CAMARA team, where they will be reviewed, explained, and then progressed until a state where they can be submitted for approval to be taken into CAMARA. Then we have 2 main teams working on guidelines, so the commonalities team and the identity and consent management team. And these teams are very important for the consistency of the APIs. Then we have the release management team, which defines the processes and the milestones and the artifacts that need to be provided for API release and for the meta release. And then we have the marketing and outreach team that does the planning and performing of the marketing activities of CAMARA. Then the actual work on APIs is happening in the API repositories, and these are grouped in 2 ways. Either you have the independent sandboxes, which are for new APIs that are in early development stages. And then we have the sub-projects that group 1 or more mature APIs and in a logical way. So still each API development is done in the repositories. And finally, but last but not least, we have the governance of CAMARA, where we have TSC, the Technical Steering Committee, which take the overall technical decisions. We have the End User Council that manages the demand and the requirement side for the APIs. And then the Governing Board, which is more strategy and financial for the CAMARA project. Next slide, please. So then what is a meta release? So a meta release is really a set of released CAMARA API versions that are released together and aligned together to a set of common guidelines and for design and security. So the meta release also sets the schedule for so that it's easy for API providers who want to implement the APIs to know when they can go and get their next version or get new versions of APIs. And also for the API consumers, the people building applications, to know which APIs they should be relying on for their application building. And so CAMARA meta releases ensure overall the API consistency, the quality of the APIs, because there is a review in the API lifecycle at each stage to progress the API through till its public release. And it also ensures the stability of APIs, the reliable delivery, and the integration of feedback from the community into the release process. So it's improving over time as well. So you see in this picture the 3 circle. In the middle, you see the evolution of the design guidelines and the security guidelines, then the APIs, and then the external consumers of those APIs. Next slide, please. So then for a particular API lifecycle, so the development and versioning, a few words on that. So as said, the commonalities and the identity and consent management working group each develop their guidelines in their own repository, and they will release a given set of information for the meta release. Then the API subprojects, they manage one or more API repositories. And in one API repository, you can put one or more APIs, but those APIs, they should be very closely related, because in one repository, so API repositories are the base of API releases. So if there's multiple APIs in one repository, they will always be released together. So the API repositories then are being given a stage of maturity so that you can know what you're working with. So they can be in a sandbox stage, in an incubating stage, or in a graduated stage, which is where the really stable APIs will be. Today, we don't yet have any graduated APIs, but we should be nearing that in some of the future meta releases. Then API versioning is very important, of course. So CAMARA adheres to the semantic versioning standard for API versions. We have 2 main types of public released API versions. So they can be initial APIs, which are the V0 APIs, and the stable APIs where they are at V1 or higher. And then during the life cycle of the development cycle of the APIs, there are a number of pre-release stages, and they can go through successively through alpha or release candidate versions of those APIs. And the release candidates are the ones that are being reviewed for the milestones of the meta release. So one other important thing is that API version is independent of the API repository release number. So APIs clearly have their own versioning and are clearly versioned, while the repository, which are then eventually released, have their own release number. Next slide, please. So then on the processes which are defined by the CAMARA group, we have both a meta release process as well as API release processes. So the meta release process sets the milestones for the overall meta release, so this whole set of APIs and the commonalities in ICM. You see the blue ones here are the milestones for the commonalities and the identity and consent management deliverables. The green ones are for the APIs that are relying on those. And then you have the actual meta release milestone. So the M5 is the real meta release date that we're targeting for. In this case, it's the spring release. There's also a schedule for the fall release. So as part of the process, we define the criteria for what the stable and initial API versions mean, and have the checklist, which is the API readiness checklist that you see on the side here. It's very small, but you can zoom in later, which defines for each API version release all the assets they have to provide, such that they are a well-documented API. And so then we have for the API release process really defines how the API versioning progresses during the API lifecycle, and also how you prepare the release of a repository. So it's more the GitHub's part of the release process. All of it is documented on the CAMARA wiki and also inside the GitHub, so you can go and see there. And so far we've released 3 meta releases. The fall 25 is the latest, and spring 26 is the next one. Next slide, please. So one word on the fall 25 meta release then. Herbert will be giving you the interesting information about the APIs, but so I'd give comment here on the commonalities and ICM updates for the fall 25. So the whole CAMARA design, the API design guide was revisited, cleaned up, have more examples and improved. And there is a new guide, which is the CAMARA API Event Subscription and Notification Guide, which is for the subscribe notify pattern of APIs that we now have included in CAMARA based on cloud events. Then for commonalities in ICM, so this meta release adds an additional authentication authorization flow based on the JW2 bearer token. And it also includes references now to RFC 9700 for OAuth security. Sorry, there's a mix-up in the text there. So that's in terms of content. And then what's also new is that the commonalities in ICM has now developed their own API. So there is the consent info API, which can be used by applications to request to validate and check if the consent has been requested for the application, for the APIs used by the application, I should say. And if so, continue, and if not, request the consent to be captured. So this is in an API repository. It's handled just as any other CAMARA API, but it is owned by the Identity and Consent Management team. Next slide, please. And this is my last. So then we're now, we've kicked off the Spring 26 meta release. It was in the last technical steering committee on October 1st. This is the generic schedule, but it was kicked off in October 1st. And we're targeting for Spring 26 to release the version 1 of some of the commonalities assets. So to get them really into a very steady state. And that is all I had to say. I'll hand over to Herbert for the APIs.
Yes, thanks, Tanja. And I'm happy to present the APIs which we have in the meta release. And as you can see, there are a lot. We have 40 repositories and with 60 APIs which were released in the meta release. And we grouped them here a little bit. I will not tell about every API something, because then we would be here in 3 hours maybe still, but give later some examples. But much more important, I will show you where you find the detailed information for all the APIs. But shortly, the grouping here, we have stable APIs, which have already a version number greater than 1.0.0. They were also updated from the last time, but without breaking changes, except I think one example where we had a breaking change, and there you have now already the version 2. Then we have the APIs which were already in the spring release and slightly updated, but they are on their journey to get stable. So you can rely on these APIs a little bit more already than on the new initial APIs, which have typically their 0.1.0 version in this meta release. They are the new kids on the block, as I call them. But they are also a lot, we spend a lot of effort already that they are aligned with the commonalities of CAMARA, and you are invited to test them in your implementations and start with them to improve them within the next release. So if we go to the next slide, where you can find information about the APIs. So the best starting point maybe is the CAMARA project website. There you find 2 pointers here, the API overview, which I will show on the next slide, and the menu to go directly to the API descriptions. If you're not interested in a website but want to go to GitHub directly, that's also a very good option, because there you find on the homepage of CAMARA on GitHub the list of all APIs with direct links to the releases as well. If we go to the next slide, That is one of the two tables which are showing all the APIs which we have released. The table shown here, that are the more mature APIs, so the stable and updated API versions. There's a second table on the same page which shows the APIs in earlier development phases, which are mostly the first initial API versions, which I have shown on the first slide. If you go on one of the links, we will take SIM-swap here as an example on the next slide. Then you come to a description of the API with a high-level description, use cases where these APIs are good for, and the benefits you would have if you use the API. That is provided for all 60 APIs in the meta release. And on the right side of the same page, you find all the necessary links to go into details. APIs which are belonging to a sub-project have the links there. You find a wiki where you find also the main contacts which you can approach. If you have questions or want to contribute something to the API, that's a good place to go. The API repository itself, where all the development happens, and then the list of API versions. So you see that SIM-swap has already some history in CAMARA. It was one of the first APIs, and with the fall release, we have now the version 2.1.0. The link here is important because it will bring us then to the release. But first, one remark, there is a link to the GSMA public launch status page, which is important if you want to know if this API is already implemented by an operator in your relevant markets. And there you find also links to the pages, the developer pages of channel partners and operators which are offering these API already. Going to the next page. That is a typical release page where the information you can find. We are now already in GitHub. So you see that the release of the repository SIM-swap has two APIs, SIM-swap and SIM-swap subscriptions. You find on this page also the links to the API definition itself in different formats. And on the information what changed compared to the previous version, structured into added, changed, fixed, and removed in case we removed some functionality. If you go to the next page, please. That is just an example how it looks if you go on one of the API definition links. So you see that you get the information about all parameters, how they are defined, which error messages you can expect, the typical presentation of an API here in the example of Redoc. But we have also Swagger UI available on a one click, or you go directly to the YAML file. So that was the last page, which information is available. Now we are coming to the APIs. The stable APIs are complete on this page. And so there are two APIs which come out of the device status. Subject is device reachability status and device roaming status. The service providers can get reliable information in which status a device is. For fraud management, two important APIs are SIM-swap and device swap. So if the SIM for a mobile number was exchanged recently, or the device which is connected to such a SIM was changed, that can be important indications of fraud. One-time password SMS, you know all. That is when you get a code which you then have to put in again, and that is both the sending of the SMS and checking the code afterwards. One of our flagship APIs is number verification. Already within the spring release, we have updated that to the version 2. Because now number verification works also within Wi-Fi, not only when the device is connected to a mobile network. A very important new functionality that will allow really to get rid of one-time passwords in many situations where the verification of a mobile number can be done silently in the background. Location verification is also a similar function which allows to verify that someone is really in a region where he is claiming to be. Then also a lot of interest is always on the quality on demand API. It comes with a second API, which is QoS profiles. These QoS profiles define the characteristic of the connection you can request with quality on demand for a certain IP flow and for a session of a certain length. We have in the new and updated APIs more APIs which are for other use cases which are around quality of service, but this is the most mature one currently. And last but not least, simple edge discovery, an API which allows to ask for the nearest edge location so that the traffic is going directly to the best location where edge computing for an application will happen. Going to the next slide. We have a few examples here from our group of updated APIs, which were already available in Spring 25. Carrier billing, you can imagine what the functionality is behind it. I've seen in the chat a question about getting information about quality in real time about a session, that is connectivity insight. Device identifier and location retrieval are additional functionality which help in e-commerce and logistics, either to strengthen fraud detection or enable context-aware services. Population density data is, for example, important for drone flights if they are not allowed to fly about dense populations, but also for all kinds of other traffic safety or capacity plannings. And last but not least, here's an example of the family of WebRTC call handling together with two other APIs allows unified communication based on telco in communication service provider networks, but with the standards of WebRTC. If we go then to the new kids on the block, which are in early stage, there's one very important, which already Tanja mentioned from the Identity and Consent Management Working Group, is Consent Info. That is an API which enterprises and application providers will use to capture the necessary permissions to process users' personal data, not only when they are really calling the API, but they can use this API to get these the consent of the user already in advance. For example, when they are onboarding a user to an application. We have then a group, I mentioned it already, which is around QoS, two new APIs in this meta release, dedicated networks. It's more reservation of capacity for critical communication, while network slice booking is doing something very similar, but with a very concrete technology, which is not always what developers need. They maybe will go more to the abstract dedicated networks. Energy footprint notification, also a very interesting new API where we want to see how it will develop, where you get for a service which you are hosting on a cloud infrastructure plus a connectivity which is used by this service, information, how much energy was used for that. Verified caller for a typical problem which we have currently, that you often not know and can't trust the number which you get with an SMS or a call. Verified brands which will be shown for a call. Yeah, so that are the APIs I wanted to show. Then 2 slides shortly how you can get access to the APIs. First of all, I explained already how you get the API definition and documentation. And then you should look on the GSMA public launch status map to get information which API providers already offering these APIs. I have here the example for SIM-swap in Germany. There are the operators which are offering it, but also channel partners like Infobip or OneEdge or others which have it already also in the portfolio. And there you find also the links then to the portals where you can really get in contact with the API providers. On the next page, shortly, a motivation that depends on the contributions we get from people. If you want to define priorities and drive the direction of CAMARA, have ideas of new requirements, or just want to correct a bug you found in one of the APIs, you are happily invited to join CAMARA and help us with our work. The next slide is shortly showing what is the first step or the two first steps to do it. Subscribe to our mailing list. That will also ensure that you always get the latest information about releases. And to contribute to open issues in the project, you need a GitHub account. And to contribute really changes and improved contributors license agreement, typically with your company. Yeah, so that's from my side about the APIs. And now back to Jill, I would say.
Great, thank you. Just a quick note before we go into this slide. It looks like the chat section has been really active. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your questions. Just to help us prepare going into our live Q&A, if you had a question in the chat that was not addressed, can you please repost it at the bottom so it doesn't get lost? And also, if you have a question for a specific speaker, that would also be helpful. So before we jump into the Q&A, we just wanted to take a few minutes to recognize and congratulate our top 10 contributors. It's the hard work and dedication and support of these folks, along with the entire community, that makes CAMARA what it is and makes us able to issue these releases. So I won't call out everybody's names. I know folks can sometimes get embarrassed, but we want to make sure that we give a big shout out to all of the people behind the scenes that are actually contributing and making these APIs come to life. So big virtual round of applause for our contributors. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. And with that, we are going to dive into our live Q&A. So to kick things off, let me see here. Somebody is asking, how does somebody become an aggregator?
Oh. Should I take that one?
Yeah, feel free.
So becoming an aggregator means that you have a business where you decide to build basically a system that offers CAMARA APIs northbound, and that will integrate with different operators on the southbound. So that's the role that allows to give developers a single point of access that instead of having to talk to each of the service providers individually, allows them to go to one place for their API, CAMARA APIs. Maybe that's the short answer. Then it's a business decision.
Yeah. Great, thanks. As I mentioned, a lot of these questions may have already been answered in the comments, but we'll address them since we have the time. We have a question asking where CAMARA is when it comes to an API that can tell the real-time QoE for a specific user session.
Yeah, I can take this. I already mentioned that we have connectivity insights. If there's another API in development, which is session insights, which has a slight different scope. So I would recommend to look on what is happening in these two repositories and have a closer look on the functionality.
Great, thank you, Herbert. How about number masking? Is there a number masking API or a proxy API on the roadmap currently?
I would need to understand what is meant with it.
Fair enough. Feel free.
At least I'm not aware. So
yeah,
but,
feel free.
New API proposals are always welcome. We have the API backlog working group for that. So a description, what is intended, what is the scope, and typically these proposals are coming from people who are then also willing to take the first steps for defining the API. And then after review in the API backlog working group, we can have a repository for it.
Great, thank you. Another question, are there ways of developing by using some of the APIs, perhaps even the alpha ones, and testing within a sandbox environment even before being adopted by local telcos?
Yeah, I can take that one. So the APIs of CAMARA can be used at any point. But it is not recommended to use any APIs that haven't been publicly released in the in commercial applications. So you can take APIs at any time, whether it's an alpha or a pre-release, and then you can test those. But of course, if you're an application developers and you want to test them, you'll have to have an implementation against which to test. And so here you can go to the various places where there might be some of these offered in the pre-stage as well. So that's would be on an aggregator platform or on the service provider's own exposure platform.
And as far as I know, Nokia has also kind of a sandbox environment.
Yes. Yeah. Correct.
All right, we have some other good questions. A lot of these were already addressed, as I mentioned, by folks in the comments, many of whom are very active in the community. So thank you everyone for your discussion. We love it. But we'll ask it again here in case there's a different answer, a different point of view. What are some of the main obstacles that operators face in moving from pilots to large-scale API monetization?
I'm happy to take that question. If you can hear me okay, I think I've got a slight delay online. I think depending on the services, the products may require market coverage. And so that's where we have the program under GSMA for a service like identity, where we can, as operators, work together across a market and identify which services are going to be developed. Because if we were to develop, for example, a SIM swap API for financial services, the financial services company doesn't know which telco or CSP the customer is a customer of. And so it requires full market coverage. So I think absolutely we can run pilots, but then we need to get consensus and buy-in from a full market for us to then build to provide a service where it requires full market coverage. For the likes of quality and of service or location and identity applies to a certain extent. One of the challenges that we face is regulation and data privacy regulation or net neutrality regulation, depending on the service, which may differ market to market. So in terms of our execution, it may be that we need to drive not only alignment within a market, but then if we want to take a product we've launched in the first market into a second, it may have a different regulatory landscape. So I think in terms of that rollout, there are some sort of landscape elements that may play a contributing role. And then in terms of the telcos themselves, obviously each of these services requires resource and investment in order for us to scale those out. But we are seeing, I would say, increased momentum, acceleration, interest, more and more markets mobilizing. And so that will also help, because the more we are able to create market coverage, the more we are able to meet customer need, and the more that global customer need can also be met by multiple markets being enabled. So I think some obstacles there, but I think they are definitely elements that we're beginning to see good progress on overcoming.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to some more questions. I think the rest of Mitch's questions there were pretty well responded to in the comments. We do have another question. Are there any APIs related to fraud detection?
Oh, that is our biggest group of APIs that we have. So as I've shown the API overview, there's an own category, portfolio category with all the APIs in this area. There's at least one API also, which is not on CAMARA, but driven by GSMA, scam signal, which is used in some markets. We cannot host it in an open source project because the algorithms behind how scam will be discovered is then something which should be public. But we have all these SIM swap, number verification, number recycling. That's all helpful to discover fraud. And it will be certainly also combined by service providers into products which, then protect the account against takeover or and combine some of the APIs.
Great, thanks. We have a question on the direct billing API asking if you manage both subscription and one-shot or only one-shot.
I hope now that someone is maybe in the chat who is more expert than me on that.
Fair enough. We can move on to the next question then. Let's see here. For the direct, we just asked that. Sorry. I think we've got most of the questions. Let me just scroll through here for just a moment. Mitch again has asked if there's a common theme to the APIs in this release. I did see some chatter on that, but Herbert, Tanya, Johanna, are you seeing any themes with this group of APIs specifically?
Not really. It's more in terms of the corresponding guidelines so the meta release is with respect to the common guidelines, not with respect to any theme. Now, if it's a marketing theme that you're looking for, I did personally not notice any particular. Well, there are 2 or 3 categories that increased more. I need to, but I don't remember by heart which ones those were. I had that in this presentation, but
we not restrict the meta release to any of these portfolio categories. So how they are coming in. The most important part is really that they are consisting across the board due to the common guidelines.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's more market demand. Whatever people are asking and submitting for is what we address.
Yeah.
Great. So last call for questions. I think we've got most of them. One more I wanted to bring up is we've got a question asking about coverage in Europe. So I'm going to assume that you're asking how well deployed these APIs are in Europe.
The best thing is maybe to point again to the deployment map of GSMA. You can even filter there for the Europe as a region and see that. But maybe Johanna wants to add something as a European operator.
Yes, apologies, I've got a bit of a delay. So yeah, I think absolutely that's the right answer. Best place to go is the GSMA coverage map, which will show you not just the markets, but the operators and what products in CAMARA are deployed, whether they are certified. So it's quite a rich source of information. I would say overall, the collaboration in Europe is very strong. So we have a number of markets that have announced now their collaboration on the topic. So we have full market coverage, which includes now UK, Germany, Spain, France, Netherlands. So there's a good rollout across the European footprint and more to come in the coming months. So yeah, I would say Europe is well advanced, but for the detail of which product, because that's obviously critical for that coverage question, the GSMA map is the place to go.
And I believe it's been linked in the comments as well. It's pretty easy to find. We do have another question here. Is the quality on demand API available for public networks, and how is it built?
So at least technically, you can build it in several ways. And that is the intention of the CAMARA APIs, that we hide this away, how it is implemented in the networks. There is a provider implementation as an example in CAMARA, where you can see how you can implement it if you have a network exposure function in your 5G core. That's one example how you can do it, but there are other ways also without a network exposure function. On public networks, yes, this is the intention, and we are currently agreeing within the markets on the first profiles, which we will offer then also across the markets.
All right, I think that takes us to our list of questions. So unless there are any more, I think we can conclude for today. Thank you to our speakers for your time and your participation and your support and sharing your knowledge. We have one more question. Great, thanks, Mohammed. Are there written operator implementations anywhere? Are you looking
for
what
like exactly is meant with written operator? Blueprints. Yeah, as I mentioned, you can have a look on what we have for quality on demand. There are 3 different repositories with provider implementations, which are showing examples. Beyond that, there are several vendors out there which have already solutions how to implement these APIs within operator networks and could be good partners for that. Each network, operator network is a little bit different, so that therefore it's difficult to have a common blueprint.
All right, we do have another question. Are the outputs or behaviors of some of the APIs standardized in some way? For instance, for QoD, could it be that the outcome experience of QoD on one telco network will be different from that on another telco network?
The profiles are defining somehow the minimum requirements. which have to be fulfilled. If you ask for a session with a certain profile, you can be sure that you get at least this minimum. There can be still differences in coverage and quality of the networks. That is what we will keep as a competition between the networks for sure. But the profile defines what the minimum is, what you can expect.
All right, I think that takes us to the end. Just want to reiterate thanks to all of our speakers, thanks to all of our attendees. This webinar will be available, a recording will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. So look for links to that, that we'll share those out over LinkedIn. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great day, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.